Sometimes you can find a way to love a game for its ambition. It may be marred by technical issues or strange design choices, but it's important for developers to keep pushing boundaries and creating new challenges for players to conquer. Sure, sometimes they can go too far, but without these sorts of games, we could never end up with the likes of Fallout New Vegas or Resident Evil 4. So it's important to give these ambitious titles their due, even if they aren't always particularly fun to play. This is probably the best way to look at SOS. The premise of the game is actually very simple. The year is 1921, and you are a passenger on a large ship called the Lady Crithania in the middle of the ocean. Unfortunately, the ship is hit by a massive wave and is now sinking. You have an hour before the ship goes completely underwater and takes you with it. The concept is simple, but the gameplay mechanics that stem from it run counter to many of the conventions of other side-scrollers from the same console generation. A great example is the length of the game. The hour you have to escape the ship is in real time, meaning that it's not a particularly long game, even for the era. Instead, the game is designed primarily around replayability, with different characters, endings, and routes for the player to experiment with over multiple playthroughs. There's a lot more story to the game than you might expect, though it is also delivered in a subtle way. Each of the playable characters has their own backstory, and as a result, their own relationship to other characters in the game. This comes into play in a world-building sense, but also a gameplay sense, through the mechanic of rescuing other passengers as you escape the ship. There are many other passengers on the ship, and they're all valued differently by each playable character. For example, you may choose to play as Jeffrey. He's a doctor and a passenger on the ship along with his wife. If you are playing as Jeffrey and you want to get the best ending, you'd better make sure that she is amongst the passengers you rescue by the end of the game. Each passenger you try to rescue has their own challenges and requirements, so planning and preparation is needed to get the outcome you want. The people you rescue have a direct impact on which of the multiple endings you receive when finishing the game. Perhaps the most impressive aspect of the game is the way the environment changes over time. As the ship sinks further and further into the ocean, the locations through the game rotate, and previously accessible paths become blocked off as the water rises. It will probably take a few failed attempts to start learning the ship layout and adapting to the differences in the environment. Unfortunately, SOS falls into the same trap that many ambitious games tend to. The game itself can't quite keep up with the vision of the developer. The biggest issue sits with the constant pressure of rescuing other passengers. You often need to go through hoops to get them to come with you, so you're already at the end of your tether. Unfortunately, the other passengers are idiots, who constantly try to take jumps they have no chance of making, frequently get stuck on objects, and generally do everything in their power to thwart your attempts at saving their sorry lives. Sure, you could do the selfish thing and just book it to the exit on your own, but that would net you the worst ending and defeat the purpose of the game. The lack of information provided through the game also adds to the atmosphere, but may make things far too obtuse for all but the most dedicated of players. Hardcore Gaming 101 makes a good point that SOS is actually an underappreciated influence on a lot of modern games, such as Dead Rising. It's also a forebear to Capcom's Dead Rising, released over a decade later for the Xbox 360. Dead Rising also takes place under a time limit of 3 in-game days, which amounts to approximately 6 hours of game time. Both are open-ended on how you get to the conclusions, and both involve rounding up survivors at your discretion. There is definitely a lot of shared DNA between both games. So, is SOS a great game? Definitely not. A good one? Maybe, though with a lot of caveats. An important one? Definitely.